Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into an epic intellectual chain reaction, one that kicked off in the 17th century and, quite frankly, forged the modern world. We're journeying back to the Enlightenment. This was a highly dangerous era where reason dared to challenge centuries of absolute power.
Think about it for a second. Can a single idea really cross an ocean and bring down an entire empire? How did a few philosophical sparks turn into a global roaring fire of democratic revolution? It's kind of incredible to realize that the foundational structures of our modern governments, things you and I take for granted every single day, began as highly controversial, even treasonous ideas drafted by just a handful of thinkers.
Section 1. The Dawn of Reason.
Now, this whole Enlightenment thing didn't just happen in a vacuum. It was born out of absolute chaos. 8 million. To put that number into perspective, that massive death toll from the 30 Years' War completely shattered confidence in church authority across Central Europe. When that many people perish in religious conflict, everyday citizens start asking serious questions about the systems that allowed it to happen.
So we're looking at a monumental shift here. For centuries, the old paradigm was basically absolute monarchy, divine whim, and unquestioned religious authority. But suddenly, this completely new paradigm starts emerging, one demanding constitutional systems, discoverable laws, and, most radically of all, the consent of the governed.
And the timing is just wild. The scientific revolution's proof of natural laws lines up perfectly with massive political upheaval over in England. Look at this rapid-fire timeline. In 1687, Newton publishes Principia Mathematica. Literally a year later, the Glorious Revolution sees King James II ousted for a constitutional system. By 1689, the English Bill of Rights is already guaranteeing free elections and free speech.
Because here was the crucial leap. People started wondering if heavy hitters like Francis Bacon and Isaac Newton could actually prove that the physical universe ran on predictable rules rather than just divine whim. Well, couldn't discoverable natural laws govern human affairs too? If math and reason governed the planets, maybe they could govern us.
Which brings us to Section 2, Architects of New Government.
So thinkers start applying this brand new scientific method directly to society itself. Take John Locke. He drops this core concept in his essay concerning human understanding called Tabula Rasa. It's the idea that the human mind begins as a total blank slate, shaped only by experience, meaning a king is not inherently superior to a commoner at birth. That single idea completely leveled the playing field of humanity.
What happens next is basically an intellectual relay race. You've got Locke arguing for natural rights back in 1689, decades pass, and then Montesquieu studies the English system firsthand, resulting in his 1748 proposal for a separation of powers to prevent tyranny, and then Rousseau pushes the envelope even further with his radical concept of the general will.
When Rousseau published The Social Contract in 1762, he introduced popular sovereignty. I mean, think about just how dangerous this idea was to an absolute monarch. It literally flipped the entire power structure of Europe upside down. Authority didn't flow down from a king anymore, it flowed up from the general will of the people.
Meanwhile, you have Voltaire fiercely championing freedom of expression against heavy royal and church censorship. Spurred into action by the wrongful execution of a Protestant merchant named Jean Calas, Voltaire's writings actually got him thrown into the Bastille twice, plus exiled. These ideas weren't just fun, abstract theories, they were seen as genuine existential threats to the establishment.
Section 3. Ideas across the Atlantic.
Okay, so how on earth did these heavily suppressed concepts make the jump from Europe to colonial revolutionaries? Well, despite the French crown trying their absolute hardest to crush it, this intellectual contagion spread like wildfire. It thrived in Madame Jaffrin's Paris salons and those bustling London coffeehouses, and when Diderot compiled it all into the encyclopedia, it reached a massive public audience.
You literally had diplomats like Benjamin Franklin sitting over in Paris exchanging letters with French Enlightenment figures, knitting together a unified resistance. Cheap pamphlets and translated texts were moving these arguments from London straight to Philadelphia and all the way down to Caracas. It created this entirely shared vocabulary of rights across this newly connected Atlantic world.
Section 4. The Age of Revolutions.
Now, philosophy is about to become reality. Over just a few decades, these philosophical texts ignited literal, on-the-ground revolutions. The dominoes fell so fast. 1776 in the U.S., the explosive overthrow of the French monarchy in 1789, Haiti's incredible push for independence by 1804, and Simón Bolívar laying out his vision for South America in 1815.
The crucial point here is that colonial leaders were using these exact European texts as their literal blueprints for rebellion. Thomas Jefferson drew directly on Locke's natural rights theory when drafting the Declaration of Independence. And James Madison, he looked right to Montesquieu to design the separation of powers in the U.S. Constitution. 85. That is the exact number of Federalist Papers essays written by James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay under the pen name Publius. They wrote these 85 essays for one specific reason: to explain how these abstract Enlightenment principles could actually work in a real, functioning government.
Which leads us to our final part, Section 5, An Enduring Global Legacy.
Because these philosophical shockwaves absolutely did not stop in the 18th century. Simón Bolívar, who was actually tutored by a Rousseau-influenced educator, successfully carried these arguments across South America, leading independence movements everywhere from Venezuela to Peru. And in Haiti, following the only successful large-scale slave rebellion in history, formerly enslaved people adopted an 1804 constitution that powerfully invoked those very same natural rights.
And while Jefferson famously tweaked Locke's original phrase of property into the pursuit of happiness, the core assertion remained entirely intact. It's this undeniable lineage of thought. Governments exist solely to protect individual rights, not to serve rulers.
Fast forward and look at this 1948 document, drafted by a UN committee chaired by Eleanor Roosevelt. It is a direct, beautiful echo of Locke and Rousseau's original claims. Centuries later, the international community was still heavily relying on the vocabulary forged during the Enlightenment to define what it means to be a free human being.
Voltaire's incredibly dangerous fights against censorship evolved directly into the modern civil liberties and freedoms of conscience that you and I rely on today. Ultimately, the Enlightenment argued one profound, game-changing truth. These inherent rights aren't magically granted to you by a government. They are yours simply because you exist.
Thank you for joining me on this explainer. We've seen exactly how ideas can cross oceans, dismantle absolute monarchies, and literally build the constitutional systems we live under today. But it leaves us with one final, pretty massive thought to chew on. If the radical writings of 17th century philosophers still define our global human rights today, what modern ideas being written right now will be the spark that shapes our world 300 years from now?